Look at verse 33. So when they had come to a place called Golgotha, that is to say, the place of a skull, verse 34, they gave Jesus sour wine mingled with gall to drink, but when he had tasted it, he would not drink. Jesus was crucified at a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. The Latin name for Golgotha is Calvary. And sometimes people will ask me, what does Calvary Chapel mean? Well, Calvary is where Jesus was crucified. It's the same as Golgotha. And so the name Calvary Chapel, it literally means skull chapel. I think that sounds pretty cool. And I think we should consider changing the name of the church. And we could change that little dove logo maybe into a skull. All in favor of changing to Skull Chapel. So now when your friends ask you, where are you going to church now? I go to Skull Chapel. And they're going to think you're in a cult. Right? They probably already think you're in a cult. But so the place where Jesus was crucified was known as Golgotha, the place of the skull. It was known as the place of the skull not because the hill resembled a skull, but because it was the place of execution. It was the place of death. Just like today we have the skull and crossbones, right? A symbol of death. When Jesus arrived at the place of crucifixion at Golgotha, he was offered sour wine mingled with gall to drink. This was a narcotic that was offered to victims to sedate them so that they wouldn't suffer as much or feel as much while on the cross. And notice that Jesus refused to drink it. He could drink it, but he chose not to drink it. He would not sedate himself, choosing rather to fully experience the suffering of the cross for us. Verse 35 says, then they crucified him, and they divided his garments, casting lots, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet, they divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. So before Jesus was hung on the cross, before he was crucified, he was stripped naked. Just think about what this is telling us. The Roman soldiers would strip people naked before crucifying them to further humiliate them. Crucifixion was designed to inflict the maximum pain and maximum humiliation. This is why Paul writes in Philippians 2, speaking of Jesus, he says, Jesus made himself of no reputation. Remember, he's God. He was in heaven, in glory, in majesty, in honor, and he made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant, leaving heaven, coming down to the earth, taking the form of a bondservant, coming in the likeness of men, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. Jesus humbled himself and was obedient to the point of death, but Paul says not just any death, even the death of the cross, the most humiliating death. And here is the Son of God. Here is God incarnate, come down from heaven to the earth. He becomes a man. And he allows himself not only to be crucified, he allows himself to be stripped naked, to be stripped even of his clothing, and then nailed to a cross. In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2, it says, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame. And he has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. He endured the cross, despising the shame, despising the humiliation that it required. But just think about this. God coming down as a man, Jesus Christ, allowing his creation to crucify him, allowing his creation to put him to death, to nail him to a cross, to spit in his face, to mock him, and allowing his creation to strip him naked and gamble for his clothes and hang him naked on a cross. Now, Luke chapter 23, verse 34, that as the Roman soldiers stripped him naked and as they nailed him to the cross, that Jesus kept praying over and over, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And the Greek indicates he prayed it over and over as they're ripping his clothes off of his body. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. As they're laying him on the cross and nailing in those nails, Father, oh Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. 1 Peter chapter 2 says of Jesus, when he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but he committed himself to him who judges righteously. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Jesus prayed for those who mocked him, who spit in his face, who humiliated him, stripped him naked, and crucified him. And he prays for them as they're doing it, as they're crucifying him. And Jesus told us to do the same thing, right? To pray for our enemies. Matthew chapter 5, but I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. That's what Jesus did. Again, verse 35 tells us this dividing up of the garments of his clothing and casting lots, rolling dice to see who gets to keep his stuff. This actually fulfilled prophecy, Psalm 22, which was written more than 1,000 years before Christ came. But even this detail, that his garments would be divided among them and that his clothing would be gambled away, even that detail was predicted in the Old Testament. Then verse 36 says, sitting down, they kept watch over him there. These Roman soldiers, their job was to crucify those that were condemned to be crucified. And once the criminals were hanging on the cross, they just had to sit and watch and wait for them to die. You know what that's like. You probably have had a job at some point in your life where you were given a task, and once you completed that task, you could just, look at your phone or whatever and just wait. And for these Roman soldiers, their job was to put these guys on the cross and wait for them to die. They've got them up on the cross, and now they're just sitting and watching and waiting.